We got quarterman in me, that's all we need.
Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I think this is actually going to be a pretty short hearing day. We are going to start with Canal Place.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Carrie Cook from DLS to present the analysis for Canal Place Preservation and Development Authority. So beginning on page 1, the FY25 proposed budget decreases about $234,000 from the prior year. And this is due to a one-time grant that the agency received in fiscal 2024 through the Economic Development Administration. It's a federal grant passed through the Maryland Department of Commerce. Exhibit 1 on page 2 shows the overview of the agency spending in the FY25 allowance. 45% is for personnel and about a quarter is for facility maintenance. Exhibit 2 on page 3 shows the proposed budget change from FY24 working to the FY25 allowance. You can see here that they had some changes associated with salary increases, again, offsetting that one-time grant that I just mentioned, as well as some changes associated with a fiber optic project. They had fiber optic capabilities installed in their offices to sort of, bring some of their technology and some of their capabilities in line with the other state agencies. Page 4 shows their personnel. Canal Place is a very small agency. They have 4 positions, so they have a 0% vacancy rate, which is great. And then finally, just moving on to the key observations here on page 5, this is the main issue for the analysis. So Canal Place administers the passages of the Western Potomac Heritage Area. This is one of the, I think, 14 heritage areas in the state, but it is the only one that also functions as its own independent state agency and instrumentality of the state. So it kind of has this unique position here. So there has been a bill that has been introduced in the Senate to sort of change the structure and function of Canal Place. So I'm going to go over just a few of the provisions and then have the agency address their thoughts on the bill and any implementation issues. So the bill does a couple things. One of them is replacing the current Canal Place Board of Directors with a new board, and that board consists of the president of the Allegheny County Commissioners, the mayor of Cumberland, and a member appointed by the Allegheny County delegation in the General Assembly. It also requires this new board to enter into agreements to delegate management of their various properties. So right now, Canal Place has a small portfolio of a couple different properties under their purview, and this bill is sort of splitting them out into different entities for management. The bill also establishes a financing fund as a special non-lapsing fund for all operations and projects, and also could potentially limit the ability of Canal Place to hire and retain personnel. So the bill would allow Canal Place, actually it would be renamed, but it would allow Canal Place to maintain status as an instrumentality of the state and still be an independent executive branch unit. Presumably they would still receive general funds. However, their budgetary needs would likely be less than what they are now, since they're delegating out those properties to other entities, as I just mentioned. The bill also removes the authorization to hire personnel from their purview and instead gives that authorization to the newly formed board that I just mentioned a moment ago. The bullet points on page 6 provide more detail into delegating responsibilities of the various Canal Place properties to other entities, as well as delegating responsibility for some of their current projects. So at the bottom of page 6, we just request that the agency comment on the proposed legislation, including any operational or logistical challenges that they foresee. And then we also want them to discuss any changes that, if enacted, may negatively impact investments that the state has already made into their ongoing projects. And just very quickly, some updates on page 8 from issues that we talked about last year. They had a backlog of some required audits that they have gone through and gotten back on track there. Their River Park project, which is their main capital project, continues to progress with planning and engineering. And as I mentioned before, they had fiber optic capability installed to allow them to become in full compliance with Open Meetings Act requirements. And the recommendation from DLS is to concur with the governor's allowance. That concludes my formal presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Great job. Okay, we have Deidre Ritchie.
Right.
I think I walked up with you this afternoon.
Yes, you did. We were up here once and then we went back downstairs because we thought we were in the wrong place. So we were wandering aimlessly.
Well, you got here anyway. That's all that matters.
Thank you. We appreciate that. So yes, my name is Deidre Ritchie. I'm the Executive Director of Canal Place Preservation and Development Authority. And I'm also the Executive Director of the Passages of the Western Potomac Heritage Area. And I'm going to let my co-partner here
Hi.
introduce herself.
I'm Kim Folk. I am the admin specialist, working.
I'm gonna bring that mic over in front of you there, please.
Oh.
Thank you.
I'm Kim Folk. I am, admin specialist at Canal Place, working in finance and marketing there.
Okay.
All right, I probably don't need a mic. Anyway, I thank you, Madam Chair and committee members for hearing our testimony today. And as always, Carrie's wonderful, great analyst, and we do concur with what she has stated in her analysis. However, I was asked to address the proposed Senate Bill 1070 legislation. And I just want to give a brief background on how that will affect us from what we know. And then if you all have questions, or if you really want to get into it, there's more information in the actual fact sheet we provided.
All right.
So on December 19th of 2023, we were asked to hold a special meeting with Senator McKay and Delegate Buckle. We were told it was in regards to upcoming legislative session and to give them an update on our River Park. At that meeting, which was a public meeting, we did do the update, but we were also told by Senator McKay that he was going to propose legislation that would just kind of, really affect Canal Place. And we had asked exactly how the legislation was going to work. Members of the audience that were there had also asked what all that meant, because we were unclear and had no idea this was going to happen. My board chair at that time said, if there's anything you need us to assist you with when writing the legislation, please contact us. We didn't hear back about the legislation until February 6th. And on February 9th, Senator McKay had asked us to get my board together to discuss the legislation and vote on whether Canal Place approved it or not. We really didn't have time just because of everybody. I have a volunteer board. So we had the meeting, and I believe Senator McKay was even on that meeting, but we discussed what we knew about the legislation, which is not a whole lot. We don't understand a lot of the legislation. So my board at that time voted to oppose the legislation. So that's kind of where we are now. The reason, I guess, for the questions.
Has the bill been heard here in a committee?
No, it's March 1st, but I can tell you this, from the day that legislation was dropped, we have had hundreds of people contacting our office in opposition, and they will be coming down to testify.
Okay.
So the questions we have is mostly about the funding. Right now, yes, we are the only heritage area that owns property, and we were created that way back in 1993. So we could generate our own revenue. Canal Place was put there. There was a lot of blighted property. They were trying to do better things in Allegheny County in the city of Cumberland. So we were set up as the first heritage area to self-generate our own money and not have to rely on county, city funding for our budget. So that's why we're set up the way we are. We're unclear with this legislation and how this is proposed, where money is going to be coming from now. It totally affects the way our heritage area is set up, because we require a 1-to-1 match. And from the revenues that we generate from our shops and our festival grounds and parking, things like that, that's how we match our money. And if you look at our budget for our small state agency, we generate $570,000 a year comes into the state of special funds and then comes back out to us so we can match salaries and things like that. So if that funding is jeopardized, it stops everything at Canal Place. Our positions are gone and we're not real sure where they're going. Because we are a state agency, the heritage area is supposed to go to the heritage area. We don't know where that heritage area is going to land. We're in the middle of a countywide heritage area expansion to do as the governor wants to do, more inclusivity and diversity. We're right smack dab in the middle of that expansion into the entire county, Allegheny County. That would stop. The huge problem is our River Park at Canal Place project, where we now have sitting in the Canal Place fund for that project over $8 million. Again, if our agency is dissolved, that project stops. They said, or I believe Senator McKay said that he wanted that project to go to the county, Allegheny County. You will, I'm sure, hear from Allegheny County about how they feel about that. But there's just like too many negative factors. So it just totally, disorganizes Canal Place. It takes away the 9-member community at large board and puts it with 3 local elected officials. So the transparency, the decision-making, that's questionable. So my board does oppose that Senate bill.
And when is the hearing for that? March 1st?
March 1st.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I would hope that the
Senate Bill
senator
1070.
can get together with you. Do you have any input at all?
No, I mean, I'm loosely familiar. I know that the legislation was put in. I don't know all the particulars behind the scenes conversations or anything other than what you've presented here today. So I just know that it's one of the first. I believe it's in finance, I think is where it's being heard.
Yes, Finance Committee.
And so, no, I don't really have anything to add, Madam Chair.
Okay, well, I will probably get together with the sponsor of the bill and before it gets voted on and we make permanent changes, we need to get this straightened out for you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Senator.
Could I just say this one quick question? And there was some issue that was raised last year, right?
Right.
About Canal Place. I think you had in for some money and I don't think it was granted. Is that right?
Well, we were granted $1.5 million in capital budget funding for the River Park project.
Right.
Okay.
But we didn't
remember that
even
from
ask
last
for
year.
money this year for the River Park. We
Okay.
asked for no money this year.
Okay. I'm just trying to rewind the tapes. I remember there was some issue that I'd heard. It was sort of outside, but
We'll get together with
We'll
the
try to
senator
get-
and see what we can figure out.
Thank you.
That help?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, it would.
Okay. Anything else? I think we're good. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thanks for coming over. Okay, next we have MSDE education, the aid to education. And let me just say ahead of time, since I've been doing this subcommittee, we have looked at the SAIs in many different ways. We've used to have everybody, all of them come down and testify, and now we have so many that it's too much to have everybody come and testify. And I have said to people as we have gone through the years of this budget, if your money is in the budget, the chances of it being taken out are very, very slim. So we really don't need people to come down and testify if there's not money being taken away from them. And this year there is none being taken away. So we said that we would have MSDE testify for all of them. And people are nervous that they're not going to get their money, and they will get their money. So we're going to have MSDE come to the table and represent all of the SAIs. First, we're going to start with Laura Hyde, though, our budget analyst.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Again, my name is Laura Hyde, presenting for the aid education budget for DLS. So we're starting on page 1 with the operating budget summary. The aid education budget grows by $315 million or 3.2% to $10.1 billion. This increase is primarily attributable to a net increase of approximately $285 million for major state aid, with half of that amount, $141 million, allocated as general funds for teacher retirement. Turning to page 6, Exhibit 1. This is the Maryland Comprehensive Assessment Program scores, or MCAP scores, in English and Language Arts. This chart shows that in spring 2023, the majority of students scored beginning or developing at all grade levels except for grade 10, in which 53.5% of students scored proficient or distinguished. The lowest proficient or distinguished score was in grade 5, with 41.8% of students at this level of proficiency. Turning to page 7, Exhibit 2. This is math MCAP scores. This chart shows that in spring 2023, the majority of students scored either beginning or developing in math, with the highest share of proficient distinguished scores occurring in grade 3 at 40.3%, and the lowest share of proficient distinguished scores in grade 8 at 7.5%. The bold language on page 7 asked MSDE to comment on the reason for the omission of the Algebra 2 data in the fiscal 2025 Managing for Results MFR submission. Turning to page 8, Exhibit 3. This is a comparison of MCAP proficient and distinguished scores for ELA and math in grades 3 through 8. This chart shows that more students scored proficient or distinguished in ELA than mathematics at every grade level. The smallest achievement gap between ELA and math is 7.7 percentage points in grade 3, and the largest achievement gap is 39.3 percentage points in grade 8. The bold language on page 8 states that DLS recommends adopting committee narrative, requesting a report on MCAP scores and LEA progress to remediate COVID-19 related learning loss. At the bottom of page 8 and the top of page 9 under fiscal 2023, in MSDE's fiscal 23 closeout, the agency reported a total of $425.4 million in encumbrances. This included $186 million in general funds, $10 million in special funds, and $231 million in federal funds. The bold language asked MSDE to comment on the high number and amounts of encumbrances in fiscal 2023, particularly for general and federal funds. Then turning to page 10, under implementation of legislative priorities, the General Assembly enacted 8 legislative priorities in the fiscal 2024 aid to education budget. These priorities totaled $8 million and included $6 million in general funds and $2 million in special funds. The bold language on page 10 asked MSDE to comment on the current grant funding for 2 of these programs, THREAD and the Gwynn Park High School FFA program. Turning to page 11, Exhibit 4. This is the overview of agency spending. This exhibit shows that across all programs in the aid to education budget, the total fiscal 2025 allowance is approximately $10 billion, of which approximately 74% is general funds. The majority of funds in the fiscal 2025 budget allowance are distributed to LEAs and include both general funds and Blueprint special funds. Turning to page 12. Exhibit 5, this is the state fund allowance. So this exhibit breaks out the $8.9 billion in state funds in this budget. Foundation programs total $3.9 billion or 44%. Compensatory education receives $1.7 billion or 19%. Teacher retirement receives $886 million or 10%, not including $46.4 million budgeted in the Department of Budget and Management statewide account. And students with disabilities receive $731 million or 8%. Remaining programs count for approximately $1.6 billion or 19% of this total allowance. Then turning to page 13, Exhibit 6, this is the federal fund allowance. This exhibit breaks out $1.2 billion in federal funds in fiscal 2025 in this budget. Of this amount, the majority of funds, $1 billion or 89%, is allocated to 3 programs. $483 million or 41% for food services, $302 million or 26% for educationally deprived children, and $262 million or 22% for students with disabilities. Now turning to page 14, This is Exhibit 7. This is the proposed budget. So this exhibit displays all the changes from fiscal 24 to fiscal 25 in the aid to education budget. Starting at the top of this chart, net changes to major state aid programs total about $288 million, of which the primary general fund increase is for the $141 million for teacher retirement. And then $101.5 million for blueprint programs, for which the primary increase is $131 million for the concentration of poverty grant, and $5.3 million in federal fund grants. Net decreases in this budget include $310,000 for legislatively directed initiatives. That's one-time funding in the fiscal 2024 budget. $33 million for other federal fund other general fund changes, and that includes the $22.3 million for non-certificated support professional bonuses, which were funded in fiscal 23 and 24. And then $10 million for Teacher Development and Retention Fund, which was transferred to the Maryland Higher Education Commission (MHAC) Student Financial Assistance budget. And then there's also a decrease for $45.5 million in federal funds for COVID-19 relief, which passed through the aid to education budget in fiscal 2024. There's details of all of these changes by program in Appendix 8. Turning to page 17, this is Exhibit 8. This shows the enrollment change from fall 2019 to 2023. So despite a second year of increases in all major state aid program enrollment the fall 2023 enrollment remains about 20,000 students lower, or 2.4% than fall 2019. For the 2023-24 school year, the full-time equivalent enrollment increases slightly by 1,140 students, or 0.1%. The free and reduced price meal enrollment increases by 5,665 students, or 1.3%. The special education enrollment increases by 5,236 students, or 4.6%. And then limited English proficiency enrollment increases by 6,438 students, or 6.1%. Turning to page 18, Exhibit 9. This is major state aid to LEAs. So this table shows that the total public school aid increased by 5.2%, or $449.7 million, from $8.6 billion in fiscal 24 to $9.1 billion in fiscal 2025. Aid to education programs increased by $226 million, or 2.9%. This does not include teacher retirement. Other state aid programs increased by $82.4 million, or 43%, but this increase is primarily due to an increase in teacher retirement, which is budgeted in DBM, and an increase of $36 million for pre-kindergarten and early childhood programs. Turning to page 20 and 21, this is Exhibits 10 and 11. So these are blueprint programs in the state budget. And this shows the information on blueprint programs that are funded with blueprint special funds in the fiscal 2025 budget. The fiscal 2025 allowance includes a total of $1.9 billion in blueprint funds for the program shown here, of which $1.6 billion, or 83%, is in the aid to education budget. $200 million, or 10%, is in the early childhood budget. $116 million, or 6%, is in the Maryland Department of Health budget. And $19 million, or 1%, is in other program budgets, including funding for the Accountability and Implementation Board and personnel in the MSDE headquarters budget. Turning to page 22, this is Exhibit 13. This shows blueprint costs and funding sources in the governor's budget plan. So this graph shows that in the fiscal 2025 proposed budget, the blueprint fund has a starting balance of $2.6 billion. Projected revenues total $1.4 billion, with expenditures from the fund totaling almost $2 billion. And with these expenditures, the carryover balance from fiscal 2025 to fiscal 2026 totals $2.1 billion. Starting in fiscal 2027, Blueprint Fund revenues may not cover all eligible Blueprint program costs, which results in a general fund contribution that year of approximately $429 million, with Blueprint program costs projected to exceed revenues by approximately $2.6 billion in fiscal 2029. Now we're turning to the issues section of this analysis, which starts on page 24 with issue 1. This issue is regarding FRPM enrollment. So under section 52222 of the education article, MSDE is required to submit enrollment counts for all major state aid programs by December 1st annually, and this includes counts of free and reduced price meal students or FRPM students, which is used to determine funding for compensatory education and concentration of poverty programs. In a review of the fiscal 2024 FRPM data, DLS identified concerns in MSDE's enrollment counts, and as a result, language in the fiscal 24 budget bill required MSDE to report on the agency's process to collect and verify fiscal 2024 compensatory education enrollment data. The primary concern for compensatory education count is that the statute requires 3 separate school level counts of students to be identified through free and reduced price meals, CEP, and direct certification. DLS's review of the data submitted for the JCR identified that the greater than comparison across all 3 counts was omitted, along with other concerns, which are detailed on page 25. Similarly, in our review of MSD's second submission of these data for the JCR, as well as the fiscal 2025 data for the fiscal 25 data, there were similar concerns observed. So the bold language on page 26 notes that even though DLS does not recommend release of funds for this JCR, the submission does meet the upper requirement in the JCR for the release of $1.5 million, pending the submission of all JCR reports in certain budget codes. And then continuing in this issue further down on page 26, this is a related issue that involves FRPM counts in the fiscal 2025 enrollment submission, and this affects the concentration of poverty program. These concerns include the concerns in the previous list on page 25, along with omissions of FRPM percentages for every school, which affects the CPG count, because that uses a 3-year average of FRPM counts to determine eligibility for the per pupil grant. So on page 27, the bold language asks MSDE to respond to these concerns and then recommends adding language to restrict funds for a report on this issue. At the bottom of page 27, this issue 2, this is on PTUC enrollment counts, and that asks for, this is a related issue to enrollment, and it asks for continuing committee narrative on this issue. Then turning to issue 3, on page 29, this is anchored by exhibit 13. So this is about autism waiver enrollment and costs. So this issue is related to the increase in slots for the autism waiver program and increased costs for servicing those slots. In our analysis of the budget for this program, DLS found that even though funds are remaining from fiscal 23 allowance of $30 million to fund this expansion, the fiscal 2025 budget may be inadequate to fund that expansion, and a deficiency appropriation may be required. So even if the expansion is delayed until fiscal 25, available state funds are only adequate to support about 2,300 children for the entire year instead of the 2,950 authorized slots the state is seeking. So the bold language on page 29 asks MSD to comment on this issue and recommends continuing committee narrative for this program. Turning to issue 4, on page 30, this is exhibit 14. This is ESSER allocations and expenditures by LEA. So as of December 2023, MSD reports the LEAs have spent a total of $1.7 billion, or 61% of all ESSER funds, including $185 million, or 99% of ESSER 1 funds, $725 million, or 93% of ESSER 2 funds, and $775 million, or 44% of ESSER 3 funds. Funds unspent by the required date are canceled and returned to the federal government. Appendix 3 and 4 provide additional details on these allocations and expenditures. Then turning to page 32, exhibit 15, this also shows the expenditures by category of that $1.7 billion in funds, with the majority of funds, approximately $1.1 billion, used for instruction and instructional salaries and wages. Turning to page 33, exhibit 16. This is on Relief Act allocations. So in addition to the federal funds distributed directly to LEA, in fiscal 21, 22, and 23, LEAs received a total of $256.6 million in the Relief Act for tutoring, behavioral health, summer school, school reopening, and transitional supplemental instruction. This chart shows that at a total of $185 million, or 72% of these funds have been expended. As part of the mandated reporting In chapter 55 on these funds, LEAs were required to report expenditures to the General Assembly and AIB through calendar 2023. As of January 2024, all LEAs except for Somerset County have submitted these reports. Somerset County has 2 reports outstanding from calendar 2023, but some LEAs COVID-19 reports did not contain data that allowed for an accurate accounting of expenditures. And you can see that with the asterisks that are in that chart. So the bold language on page 33 recommends 2 actions: language restricting funds for Somerset County Public Schools until the late reports related to the Relief Act are submitted as required in chapter 55. And then continuing committee narrative requiring all 24 LEAs to submit a final closeout report on COVID-19 expenditures in the same format as the chapter 55 reporting requirements. My recommended actions start on page 34 of this analysis, but this concludes my presentation and I stand for questions.
Great job. Great job, as always. Okay, the Somerset County late reports. We just have to make that happen.
Yes. We've been working with the library. The library helped us with this recommendation, and we've been working with the library to get those
Okay.
reports in.
Okay. Okay, do you want to come up to the table? We have our acting superintendent, Carrie Wright.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am Carrie Wright. I'm the interim state superintendent for Maryland's public schools. And with me today are Krishna Chalor, who is the deputy state superintendent for operations and finance, and Donna Gunning, who is the assistant superintendent in the office of finance. And I do want to take a moment to thank you very much for your hard work and your commitment to working with us at MSDE. I wanted to share a little bit about what we've been doing with you, just to kind of give you a feel of the amount of work that's going on at the department. We've launched a very large literacy initiative around the science of reading. And that also entails the hiring of literacy instructional teams that are going to be going out across the state to observe what's happening as far as literacy is concerned, giving feedback to the schools, giving feedback to us, and helping us guide in our decision-making around the professional development that we're offering. As you know, the expert review teams have already been out and about, and they're looking at a variety of things, but these literacy teams will be looking strictly at what's happening in reading across the state. We've launched a math initiative called Launch Years. We are working with the Dana Center at UT Austin, which is really a nationally known center for the area of mathematics. And so as we're looking at the CCR standards, we're looking at our math pathways and what might that look like. And so we wanted some expert advice on that. We have been participating in philanthropic entities that are approaching us now, wanting to know how they can help Maryland out. So 2 of those initiatives, one more local called Talent Ready, is looking at apprenticeships and work-based learning. And the other is called Launch, and that is a national initiative with big name funders behind that as well. But we have also had other philanthropic groups approaching us about how they can help us in literacy. So there's a lot of interest in the philanthropic world about what Maryland is getting ready to do.
When Ike Leggett was here last week, that was one of the things he talked about. He's so excited about.
Good.
The AIB, yeah.
Yeah, that's good to hear. We are too. We are too. And I really want, before around the department's analysis, I really want to thank Laura for all of your hard work. And, you know, the team here has such respect for you and the work that you do, and how collaborative that you approach our work. So I personally want to say thank you very much, because I know you've got a very difficult job. And so I appreciate that and appreciate your patience. I'm going to turn now over to Krishna, who's going to review the department's response to your analysis.
Thank you, Superintendent, and good afternoon, Madam Chair, committee members. My name is Krishna Talur, Deputy State Superintendent for Finance and Operations with MSDE. The department's analysis has been submitted, and we are going to go over the important takeaways from what we have submitted to the committee. First, MSDE was asked to comment on the reason for the omission of the Algebra 2 data in the fiscal 2025 Managing for Results MFR submission. The data was not included for the following reasons. Algebra test is not a grade level test in which all students are tested. Therefore, only a fraction of students take the test. Algebra 2 test was formally recommended as an assessment for students to demonstrate college and career readiness by grade 11. However, the new college and career readiness standard does not allow Algebra 2 tests to be used to demonstrate readiness. MSDE was asked to comment on high number of amounts of encumbrances in fiscal 2023. Department was asked to comment on the number of encumbrances at the end of 23. The encumbrances are predominantly associated with federal funds that have access to the tidings provision, which enables recipients access to the funds for 27 months. The remaining encumbrances associated with general and special funds are associated with the current year funded programs that are not fully reconciled until after the close of the fiscal year. By the fall, the funds are fully reconciled and available balances are canceled. MSDE was asked to address legislative priorities in fiscal 24 and comment on whether grant funding was provided to 2 programs. The department can confirm that one of the recipients has access to the funding, and department is working with the other recipient to gather required documentation in order to provide access to the funds included in FY 2024 budget. In the issues section, DLS recommends that MSDE continues to work to resolve issues in the second submission of the fiscal 2024 FRPM data prior to the end of fiscal year to allow for a release of funds. DLS is not recommending a release of funds at this time. Additionally, MSDE is asked to comment on concerns in the fiscal 2024 and 2025 enrollment counts for compensatory education and concentration of poverty grant programs. MSDE respectfully disagrees with the recommendation to continue to withhold funds. While MSDE believes that it has provided the requested information multiple times and in different formats, the department is willing to meet with DLS staff to review the process for calculating the compensatory education program and the impact of compensatory education student count in the CPG program. It is important to note that schools and LES primarily use free or reduced price meal eligibility data to ensure all eligible students receive the meals as they are entitled to receive and not as a measure of student poverty. Free or reduced price meal eligibility is used as a proxy for a student level count of economic disadvantage. MSDE was asked to describe the enrollment counts for PTEC students as it relates to the enrollment counts required for the foundation program. The department recognizes errors made in FY 2023 and FY 2024 PTEC enrollment counts. These are addressed further in our analysis. PTEC program includes students in the enrollment count for foundation program for 6 years, a full FTE for the 4 years of high school, and a partial FTE for the 2 years of community college. In the 5th and the 6th year, foundation enrollment count is reduced by 0.5 and 0.75 respectively for the number of courses the student is taking at the community college, 2 in the year 5 and 3 in year 6. Regarding the autism waiver, MSDE was asked to discuss 4 items as follows. Number 1, the reason that the individuals on the wait list are considered for autism waiver services on a first come, first served basis. The approved applications through Centers for Medicare and Medicaid is first come, first served. The change would require amendments to the application. Change would require policies, procedures, and staff to conduct eligibility determination. And change would require the determination of priority status for every individual on wait list ongoing. The current status, the second item was the current status of the registry and a timetable for onboarding additional slots. In alignment with the End the Wait legislation, MDH and MSDE are implementing a plan to serve 2,950 participants in fiscal 2024. 1,100 applications to apply have been sent to the families. Third item, the intended use and timing of the remaining DPA funds if slots become available in fiscal 2024. The analysis contains the data for the Q1 and Q2 actuals and projections for Q3 and Q4. The number of slots that will be filled in fiscal 2025, given the limitations in the budget. Due to the ongoing changes to the autism waiver program, DLS recommends a committee narrative on this program. In accordance with the N2 legislation, MSDE intends on serving 2,950 participants through the autism waiver in 2025. MSDE also concurs with the recommendations as presented in the operating budget recommended action. With this, MSDE's presentation and analysis is complete, and we stand ready for any questions.
Okay, do we have any questions from anyone? Senator Bailey?
Thanks. I greatly appreciate you coming up, and I want to just go, if you could just help me understand the when I talk about the comparison of the MCAP scores, right? If you could just help me as we try to understand that, because I actually have my son is actually taking those tests, right? So how many does every student get the same questions?
Yes. Yes, they do. This is an assessment that is developed. This is a federally required assessment. The federal government requires students in grades 3 through 8 in both English language arts and math be tested. And then again in high school, and typically that is in English language arts and an area of mathematics. Typically that's algebra 1.
Okay, perfect. So I was I might have been under a different impression. I was under the impression that they all started with the same question. And then depending on how they answered the questions, then the test varied. So they got more difficult if you got them right, or they stayed the same if you got them wrong.
So it is an adaptive measure. And that you've kind of described it accurately, and it will guide those students accordingly. But this has been checked for reliability and validity in terms of this adaptive measure. It has been reviewed by the federal government. Also requires a review called a peer review of our assessment at the federal level. So it is not like what you would think of as like the same test distributed to everybody. You start at 1 and end at 50. It's not like that. It gives the ability for us to get a better handle on the level of proficiency of students. So if you do get it wrong, it will take you to a different level kind of an item. And if you do get it right, it will take you to another level of an item. And so through that, that's why you see the difference not only on this page, but more clearly on Exhibit 1 and Exhibit 2, when you're talking about ELA and math, the differences between children that are scoring at the beginning or developing level versus those that are scoring at a proficient or a distinguished level. You're trying to differentiate. We've got a 4-level system, and 4 is the highest you can achieve, and 1 is the lowest. And what we're trying to demonstrate here through these 4 levels is how many students do we actually have that are scoring proficient at grade level or above, meaning distinguished, or how many are not scoring basically at levels 1 and 2. I can see the look on your face. I'm not answering your question.
So what I'm trying to figure out is if you had a test, and I think my son told me they were like 50 questions.
Could be.
Right? That he and his friends would take, right? But they wouldn't answer the same questions.
They may not be answering the same items, but they are probably answering different items at the same level. In other words, I could have 2 items. We might be sitting side by side, and I'm going to make this very simple. We could be sitting beside each other having 2 items, and Donna may have an item that says 4 times 2 equals, and I might have an item that says 2 times 4 equals. So we're testing the same content, but then if she gets it wrong, then she goes to another level that's simpler than the 4 times 2. If I get it right, I may go to a more difficult item. So the items are designed on a test to test varying levels of difficulty. from the very simple, meaning scoring at the beginning and developing,
Right.
to the very hard, scoring at proficient and advanced.
So here's my question.
Sure.
A 10th grader in one school would be graded whether he was proficient or not versus a 10th grader in another school. And what you're telling me is that they would not have the same bank of questions.
They might, but they might be in a different order. And the other thing I'm telling you is when you use an adaptive measure, you have to balance out the test for its level of difficulty at that level, and also make sure that your the number of items that you have are testing the content that you want, and that those items are able to differentiate between those students that are at the beginning of understanding this content versus those that are at the distinguished end of understanding this content.
Okay. I just want to be able to understand.
They're
right,
normed. They're all normed.
How
Mhm.
we're able to figure out.
Yeah.
Right. Whether we're proficient or not, if we're not given the same exact test. Right. And so, you know, if he was to just mark the first 6 wrong, right, and all of a sudden his test becomes much easier, right, and then he marks the rest of them right, based on that, obviously he'd be very proficient.
Not necessarily, because
Okay.
he's missed all those at the beginning.
So
So
help me understand how this
So
works.
what it's trying to do is you're trying to ascertain the exact, I'm going to use the term proficiency level of each student. But if you've missed like the first 10 of the 50, it is probably going to get easier for you, because there's no point in just going on to the other 40 that could be getting more and more difficult, because you've already hit a level that says this content may be too difficult for you. So we're going to direct you, the computer directs you to another question to see exactly what do you know. And so that content then comes back in, and we're able then to say, Senator Bailey is proficient on this test, but he is not advanced or distinguished on this test, because he was able to get this much done, but he wasn't really able to get this much done.
Okay. How many years have we given the exact same test?
That's a good question. I want to say that's what I want to say. I want to say it's been 2, because the test has been revised. This was prior to me being here, but the test was revised. We did not test in 20 because of COVID.
Right.
And if memory serves, Maryland did not test in spring of 21 because of COVID. And I think schools were still closed, but tested in fall of 21. And so that's going to be a little bit of a difference too, in terms of not being true apples to apples, spring to spring. But then in 22.
And I can understand,
Yeah.
we missed the learning and we went virtual, and there's a lot of other
Yeah.
things.
But in 22 and in 23, we administered in person. Those 2 back-to-back years we administered in person.
Okay, and that was the biggest thing, because I did understand that the tests, it had been changing
Mhm.
over some time, that, you know, we'd go with a year, then we change the test, and we'd go with a year and change the test. And I just, you know, so that we could get a basis of what we're doing, it just
Absolutely.
seems to me to have the same test, so that we're able to really have a baseline.
I couldn't agree with you more.
So that
Couldn't
we
agree with you
know,
more. Yeah.
right, so that if this is the test we're gonna use, then that's great. So go right ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, and I didn't mean to cut you off, so go ahead.
Okay.
I just was getting ready to tell you something, but go ahead.
No, tell me, because I have one more question.
Okay. We are going to be launching an assessment and accountability task force at the department to look at these very kinds of issues that you're talking about. This task force will be comprised of parents and teachers and superintendents and higher ed experts, psychometricians, et cetera. Because I really want somebody's fresh eyes looking at this assessment. It is a very expensive assessment. Adaptive assessments are very expensive. There are other ways to measure proficiency that are not as expensive as adaptive measures. But I also want them to look at the accountability model, because I don't believe, this is Dr. Wright speaking, that our accountability model is really holding anybody accountable. And I said this to the superintendents when I met with them, because, you know, there's something wrong in this sentence when we produce assessment results and we say, we rate all of our schools by stars, and we say, you've got 76% of your students, 76% of your schools receiving 3, 4, or 5 stars, and you only have a 48% proficiency rate. So something is amiss somewhere. You can't have all of these stellar schools and low proficiency rates. I mean, this proficiency rate in mathematics for grade 8 is absolutely alarming. I mean, alarming when you're looking at 7.5%. And so we've got to really dig into, is it are we really measuring what we think we're measuring? And are we then holding schools and districts accountable in a way that we can be assured that we are getting kids to proficiency? Because that's what's alarming to me, is that when you're looking at our scores over the past decade, they have just continued to drop. And so it calls for outside eyes and outside people that don't have a vested interest in this, if you will, like psychometricians that would come in and really dig into the kinds of questioning that you're talking about, and then come back to the board. I'd like them to get this done so that because our accountability model is also embedded in statute. And so what I'm asking this committee to do is to come back with recommendations by December, so that if we have to come back to the legislature and ask for changes in the statute, we would be prepared to do that after having a good 6 to 8 months for somebody to look this over. And I think you'd be more comfortable. I know I would feel more comfortable having outside eyes looking at this and coming back with what they think is best for Maryland.
I just want to say, I really do appreciate the answer. I appreciate the sincerity. Ms. Chair, I thank you for the time. I only have one slight question more, but that's where I was headed with this. Because in talking to a bunch of teachers, right, and about the testing, they were like, there's one thing that we don't really get is, and I could be confused, but they're like, we don't know after the children take the test what the questions are.
So there's a reason for that, because item development is unbelievably expensive. I mean, when you develop items, it takes a lot of time to get the right items developed. So when you develop an item bank, and that's another thing, an adaptive measure requires a larger item bank. If we weren't using an adaptive measure, we could then periodically release items, right? Which is what the teachers are asking for. They want to see, what does that item look like? But in an adaptive measure, you have to basically kind of hold all those items close because they're so expensive. And if we started releasing items, we would have to be then developing items. But as you work over time in another type of measure, you can start releasing test items. You could start releasing, I'm going to call them testlets, if you will, like little practice tests for students that would be based on our standards at grade level, that each of those grades is assessed. I'm sure that's what the teachers are asking for.
So there's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Right. And the whole thing is, when we talk about learning, right, the biggest thing that when these kids get in high school, the teachers present them with a rubric. This is what you're going to be tested on, right? This is what you need to know to be able to be proficient in my classroom, right? And the teachers following that. But the feedback that I got was, here the teachers and the system is being tested, but they don't have the opportunity to see the rubric of where they're being tested.
So there should be a blueprint that is developed with every assessment, and the blueprint will give teachers an idea of what's going to be assessed at that grade level at that time. And it will also, I'm speaking just from my experience, it will also then tell them how much weight each strand is going to get. So if you're testing, I'll make this really simple, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, it will say on this test, 10% of it's going to be an addition, 20% of it's going to be this. So the teachers will have an idea of what's going to be assessed and how many items they can probably anticipate based on the weight of that on that assessment. Maryland, and I'll double check this, but Maryland should have a blueprint that goes along with this assessment that teachers should have access to.
There's no doubt. And I just wanted to make sure that when we're talking about our county schools, that you know, so many people are, you know, they move to a county. They
Absolutely.
look where they're going to live in a school system. They do all these other things
That's right.
based on the performance
That's exactly.
of that school system. And how, you know, and we all want obviously the best for our
Absolutely.
children, right? I just want to make sure that somebody in that school system is able to see what we're testing,
Mhm.
right?
Well,
If
what we should be testing, I'm sorry, what we should be testing are our standards. I mean, that's what we should be testing. And that's one thing that I want this task force to look at. You know, we've got a set of standards in mathematics for every single grade. So when you look at the standards in mathematics, then that's on our website. All teachers have that. That should be that should be all that they're working on are the standards. Then when the assessment comes along, the assessment mirrors the standards. So you are literally testing what you should have been teaching all year long. And that's where the teachers should get their information from, would be the standards. So at the same time that we are doing this, we are also, and I'm going to be talking about this tomorrow in our I guess it's the blueprint hearings that are coming tomorrow morning, talking about the process that we're getting ready to put into place around the revision of our standards, because some of our standards have not been revised since 2008. And typically, I mean, that's just way too long. So I'm going to talk about that process that we're going to use. That's also going to be very transparent. That's also going to involve outside eyes and also involving teachers very much so in this process, because they're the ones that, to me, an assessment, this is my philosophy. If teachers did nothing but teach the standards, whatever grade that is, then they should be able to take it to the bank when that assessment lands in front of that student, that assessment is aligned to what they've been teaching. So there's none of this need for test prep. There's none of this need for test prep booklets. There's none of that. If you just teach the standards, then when our assessment arrives in front of children, teachers should feel confident that these items measure what I've been teaching and truly measure the level of proficiency of each child.
right, I think there's nothing, you know, there's nothing better in this world than being a teacher and watching someone learn.
Absolutely.
Right? It absolutely. And that is what causes high teacher retention, right? Because let's face it, my mom was a teacher. She wasn't a teacher for all those years based on the pay.
That's right.
It was the satisfaction of watching people learn.
That's right.
And when people see the performance that's way down and they're teachers and they don't have on this one
Mhm.
test and they're told, well, it's adaptive. And
Mhm.
yeah, it changes depending on how they answer the first or the
Mhm.
second question,
Mhm.
right? Well, what are the questions? Well, you can't see them,
Mhm.
right? And here, these are the teachers that are teaching. I'm not trying to be critical. I'm just
I know.
telling you
I know.
that there are questions
And legitimate questions.
yes, and you brought it up, you know, we want to be accountable. We want to be transparent, right? Well, then I don't only think that the teachers need to see that, but as a parent,
Mhm.
I would really like to know that,
What
you
does it
know
look
what,
like?
versus this county next door to me, how are we doing with our
That's right.
teachers?
That's
Right?
exactly-
And that's something that's, you know, if we don't know some of those answers, right? Because really and
That's
truly,
right.
we're putting a lot of investment into our education system. And it's not that I don't trust you all, right? But it would sure be nice to be able to see it,
I
right?
agree.
As a parent, and that's just, thank you.
I totally understand and agree with everything you said.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Oh, don't agree with them.
Oh, don't agree with them? Oh, okay.
Any other questions, comments? I just have one, going back to the free reduced price meal count. I'm not understanding that completely.
So help me understand what your question is.
Well, we've withheld money before because of the count, is that correct?
Yeah.
And
Right.
we're still doing the count the same way. Correct?
Yes, we believe that we are counting these children according to the statute, the
Mhm.
statutory requirement. And we, there are some variances school by school with the way that DLS has calculated it versus the way that the department has calculated it. And we have come to a stall, and we're gonna meet hopefully in the interim and knock this out, because I think based on my conversations with Laura offline, there are pieces to this puzzle that MSDE believes are appropriate to consider. And there are very likely pieces to the puzzle that the DLS staff think are appropriate to consider. And we don't want to be a barrier to this, but it is important to note that this data is collected from school systems. It is used primarily to provide free or reduced meals to students who qualify economically. And we use that information as a proxy for student level identification of economic disadvantage. So it's not necessarily a one-to-one connection. Some of the issues, I believe, have to do with the way that the LEAs are reporting the data to us. We recognize that, we can work on that. We have no problems working on that. What we have done, because we get this data, in a minute, and we have to turn around and give it in 30 minutes. We have made adjustments in the file to count the kids that we believe are most appropriate to be counted. And I can give you an example if you want, or if that's too much in the weeds, we can. That's okay, or you want an example?
Yeah, if you have an example.
So if you have a school, so here's the other piece of this, is that kids who are eligible for comp ed have to be in the 930 enrollment count. That's the first step, right? The 930 enrollment count is as of September 30th, a point in time. These are the kids that are in your enrollment count.
Right.
The free and reduced price meal data comes in October. So this free and reduced price meal count could include kids who are not in your 930 count. So
Correct.
we have to make sure that we're not including kids in the comp ed count if they're not in the 930 count. We also have to exclude pre-K students. So if I have a school data that says their free and reduced price meal total number of kids, free plus reduced, is 110, and then I look at their direct certification plus their USDA forms is 112, if you read the statute, one might interpret that to say the count should be 112. MSDE will say, no, it should be 110 because free and reduced is the number that's being reported for this purpose. And so it's likely that those two kids in that direct cert plus USDA forms data are probably children who are not in the 930 count. So it's
a discussion we'll continue to have. Is
yes, we will.
that okay? Okay.
All right.
Are there any other comments? Sarah Benson?
To me just a little bit about the students who are autistic. I'm looking here, I glanced through here very quickly, and it has indicated that that there still will be there are a number of students, a couple thousand students that are on a wait list. Can you talk to me just a little bit about the autistic program
Right.
and where we are with that?
So for the autism waiver program, the department, MSDE, collaborates with the Department of Health because they are the agency that manages the state's Medicaid plan through the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare, and I may have that backwards. So when we are working with the Department of Health to amend our application to make sure that we have a number of slots that the state is providing funding for, and we will get matching funds from the federal government, So we are amending that application and we are onboarding families enrolling in this process. It takes time because you have families who have enrolled maybe, I don't know, 7 years ago, and they no longer need or want the service. So you have to give enough time to make sure you've contacted that family and you've made sure that they're confirming that they no longer want the service. So there's time involved in checking those families that were on the waiting list, while you're at the same time, because you have new slots, you're adding families to the wait list. And the other issue is, and this is my historical experience, so we could have some updated information that I'm happy to provide if that helps you. But I believe part of the issue is the number of providers for autism waiver services is also an issue. You can have, we can have a number of children on the autism waiver registry, but if we don't have the providers to serve those children, then we can't, we can only serve what we have providers to serve. But I do know that MSDE and the Department of Health have been working collaboratively to increase the number of autism providers through the registry. So.
Senator Bailey.
One more very short question, but I'm going to face this probably to the analyst, or maybe Ms. Chair, if you happen to know. Last year, we had to put some language in because MSDE hadn't provided us with all the reports that
We had how many reports?
that we needed. And I just wanted to know where we are and how well we're doing on getting all the reports in a timely fashion.
So in the bold language, when we were talking about the FRPM scores, there is actually bold language in there that states that MSDE has met the requirement to turn in all their reports. So they also submitted the required letter. So they will be getting their $1.5 million back. The distinction there is that the FRPM report, we still are withholding funds for that until that issue is resolved.
Thank you. We greatly appreciate that compliance with that.
Yeah, we tried last year to get some reports and didn't get them. So when it came time to move in the budget, we fixed it. So kind of how we have to fix it sometimes to get the reports.
Well, I can assure you we'll do our best to be on top.
Thank you. I think you are on top of it already. Yes. Okay, I think that probably ends. I don't have any other questions. You good, Senator Bailey?
I'm good.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank
Look
you.
forward to seeing you again.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for your time.